They say people come into your life for a reason. But no one ever tells you that sometimes, the person who saves you isn't a stranger, it's someone you once thought you lost forever. In the middle of a snowstorm in Wyoming, one woman's truck dies. And fate brings her to the doorstep of the man whose life she once saved, without even knowing it. Before we dive into this powerful story of second chances and unexpected reunions, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. If you love real-life stories that touch the heart, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We've got another emotional journey coming your way tomorrow that you won't want to miss. Let's begin. The wind howled across the open plains of Jackson Hole, Wyoming, sweeping snow in thick, blinding waves. Temperatures had dropped well below freezing, and visibility was near zero. In the middle of it all, Morgan Blake, a 32-year-old former Army medic, sat hunched behind the wheel of her broken-down pickup truck. Her hands trembled, not just from the cold, but from the creeping panic that came with being utterly alone in a whiteout. She hadn't expected the storm to hit this hard. She was supposed to just pass through town, keep her head down, and move on. That was always the plan. But life, just like war, rarely followed orders. Several miles away, in a remote cabin surrounded by pine trees and silence, Eli Turner, a 43-year-old Marine veteran turned mechanic, caught sight of something strange through the snow, a flicker of red tail lights, unmoving. Something didn't feel right. He pulled on his boots, grabbed his parka, and set out. Eli hadn't rescued anyone in years. He hadn't spoken much to anyone, really. But something about that truck in the storm felt different, like fate had quietly knocked on his door again. Eli trudged through the deep snow, his flashlight cutting across the swirling flurries. As he reached the stranded truck, he knocked on the driver's side window. Inside, Morgan looked up, startled but clearly relieved. Her lips were pale, her breath shallow. Without a word, Eli opened the door and wrapped his thick coat around her. "Truck won't start?" he asked. His voice was gravelly, but calm. Morgan nodded. "Battery's dead. No signal either." "Come on," he said simply. "Let's get you warm." She hesitated, but the storm left her no choice. A few minutes later, they were inside his cabin, a modest, quiet place smelling of cedar and old books. Eli built a fire while Morgan sat curled up on the couch, watching him. "You live out here alone?" she asked. "Mostly." As she warmed her hands by the fire, her wallet fell from her coat pocket. A small, weathered military ID slid out. Eli bent to pick it up. His hand froze midair. "Morgan Blake," he read softly, then looked up. "You were with the 134th Medical Unit. Deployed in Fallujah, right?" Morgan blinked, startled. "Yeah. How did you?" "I was there. Echo Company. We were hit bad. I was medevaced out after taking shrapnel." Her eyes narrowed, searching his face. "Wait. What's your last name?" "Turner. Eli Turner." Silence fell between them like the snow outside, heavy and thick. Morgan's voice broke as she whispered, "You were the one. The critical patient I lost. They told me you didn't make it." Eli gave a small, pained smile. "I wasn't supposed to. Flatlined twice. But someone kept me breathing long enough to get to the field hospital." "That was you, wasn't it?" She nodded slowly, emotion flooding her eyes. "I never forgot you. You were the one I thought I failed." Eli sat down across from her, the weight of the past thick in the air. "You didn't fail. You saved me." Morgan turned away, her voice trembling. "But I couldn't save myself." Eli didn't press. He simply added another log to the fire and said gently, "Maybe you don't have to do that alone anymore." Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the cabin, something had shifted. Two broken souls, unknowingly tied by war, were about to begin the quiet, difficult process of healing. The next morning, the storm had calmed, but the silence that followed inside the cabin was louder than thunder. Morgan stood by the window, watching snowflakes drift slowly from the sky. Her fingers traced the edge of her now dry dog tags, memories she thought she'd buried returning like shadows at dawn. Eli handed her a mug of black coffee. "Didn't sleep much either, huh?" he asked. She gave a faint smile. "Didn't really try." They sat in the quiet, both sipping in unison, until Morgan finally spoke. "They put me on leave after Fallujah. I tried going back, but I couldn't. The panic attacks got worse. One day, I froze in the middle of a trauma case. That was it. They pulled my license." Eli nodded, his eyes softening. "You know, back then, I thought I was dead. I remember hearing your voice. You were yelling at someone to keep pressure on my chest. I held onto that voice. For a long time, I thought it was just in my head." "No. That was real," she said, voice cracking. "I fought for you like I was fighting for my own life. But when they said you didn't make it, I unraveled." Eli stared into the fire. "I didn't know your name. I never forgot your face, though. Every time I looked in the mirror and saw the scar, this one," he pointed to the jagged line down his ribs, "I remembered that someone once fought like hell for me." Morgan looked at him, eyes brimming. "And I thought I'd failed the one person who needed me most." For a long moment, they said nothing. Then Eli stood, walked into the other room, and returned holding a box, battered, taped at the edges. He placed it on the table. "I kept this," he said. "The field report. Said unknown medic, female, mid-30s, likely saved subject's life during evacuation chaos. I always hoped I'd meet her. Never expected she'd show up in a blizzard on my doorstep." Morgan's hands trembled as she opened the box. Inside were clippings, photos, even a blood-stained field note labeled Echo Company Casualty Log. Her handwriting was still visible. "You were never forgotten, Morgan," Eli said, voice firm. "Not by me. Not by fate." For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry, not from grief, but from the fragile, overwhelming feeling of being found. Over the next few days, the snow slowly began to melt, revealing winding roads and quiet hills. But inside the cabin, something deeper was thawing. Eli had never been one for words, yet somehow with Morgan, the silence between them no longer felt lonely. It felt like space to breathe. They took walks when the weather allowed. Not far, just around the edge of the tree line, where the pine needles caught the sun like stained glass. Morgan spoke little at first, but Eli noticed the way her shoulders relaxed, how her eyes softened when the wind touched her face. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch drinking tea, Eli glanced at her. "What would you do if you had your license back?" Morgan smiled, a little sad. "I'd go back to the VA hospital. Not in the ER. Something slower. Rehab, maybe. Work with veterans who feel lost." He nodded. "You think they'd give it back?" She hesitated. "I have a review coming up in Denver next week. But with the storm, I figured I'd miss it. Probably for the best." Eli leaned forward. "What if I got you there?" Morgan laughed, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Unless you've got a helicopter in your garage, I think that ship has sailed." Eli didn't smile. "Actually, I've got some friends still active duty. I helped them rebuild an engine a while back. They owe me a favor." She stared at him. "You're serious?" He nodded. "You've spent years thinking you failed. But maybe it's time you let the world see what you really did, what you still can do." That night, Morgan sat by the fire, looking through the old field notes Eli had kept. She found the one she'd written for him, the triage log, smeared with blood and dirt. Subject, Turner, E. Injury, shrapnel, thoracic cavity. Status, critical. Note, do not let this one go. She touched the page with quiet reverence. Outside, Eli was tinkering in the shed, prepping the generator, making calls. He wasn't the kind of man to say things twice, but he knew when something mattered. "And Morgan?" For the first time in years, she was starting to believe that maybe she hadn't lost herself. Maybe she'd just been waiting for the right moment, and the right person, to find her way back. The morning of the review board hearing came fast. The sun had barely risen over the frosted hills when Eli pulled his old duffel from the closet and zipped it up tight. Out back, the distinct whir of helicopter blades grew louder as snow kicked up in a swirling frenzy. Morgan stood at the doorway, bundled in Eli's spare flight jacket. Her eyes scanned the sky, disbelief etched across her face. "You actually did it," she said, breathless. Eli grinned, just a little. "I told you, some debts don't get paid with money." The military chopper touched down in the open field behind his cabin. A soldier stepped out and gave a small salute. Morgan hesitated, her fingers gripping the strap of her bag. "What if they say no?" she asked, the fear she'd buried for years starting to surface. Eli stepped closer. "Then you walk out with your head high, knowing you showed up for yourself. But I think they're going to remember who you are. Just like I did." She swallowed hard, nodded, and climbed aboard. The flight to Denver was quiet. Morgan rehearsed nothing. She'd spent so long running from the past, and now, she would speak from it. At the review hearing, she stood before a panel of stern-faced officials. When asked why she wanted her license back, her answer was simple, but powerful. "I don't want to go back to being who I was before the war. That person no longer exists. But I believe I still have something to give. Not just to patients, but to veterans like me, who need to believe we're not broken forever." Her voice didn't shake. Not once. When the decision came later that afternoon, the board voted unanimously in her favor. Her medical license was reinstated, with commendation. Outside the building, Morgan stepped into the sunlight, her breath visible in the cold air. Waiting by a military jeep, Eli leaned against the hood, sipping coffee from a paper cup. She ran to him without a word and hugged him tight, burying her face into his coat. "Thank you," she whispered. He held her there for a long moment. "You did this. I just made sure you got to the starting line." And as they stood there, two veterans no longer defined by their wounds, they both realized, it wasn't about going back. It was about starting over, stronger than before. Spring came slowly to Wyoming that year. Snow melted in soft patches across the fields, revealing a landscape beginning to breathe again. In the heart of Jackson Hole, the town prepared for its annual Veterans Day celebration, an event that had once passed quietly for Eli, unnoticed, unspoken. But this year was different. A letter had arrived weeks earlier. Official, stamped, and unexpected. The Department of Defense had reviewed his case after Morgan's testimony and the rediscovered field records she'd submitted. Eli Turner, once just a name buried in paperwork, was being honored. Morgan adjusted his tie nervously as he stood in front of the community center's mirror. "You look like a man about to get a medal," she teased, her smile soft. "I feel like a man about to bolt," he muttered. "Too late," she grinned. "They already printed your name on the program." The ceremony drew a larger crowd than expected, neighbors, veterans, local reporters. As Eli stepped on stage, applause rose from every corner of the hall. It was the first time he'd stood in front of a crowd in years. The presenter listed his heroism in Iraq, how he shielded fellow soldiers during a mortar attack, suffered near-fatal injuries, and never sought recognition. The final line came clear and proud. "We award Sergeant Eli Turner with the Purple Heart and the Silver Star, for valor and service beyond measure." Morgan stood in the front row, her eyes shimmering. As Eli accepted the medals, he took the microphone. "I didn't do anything more than the person next to me. I survived because someone didn't give up on me. And now I get to stand here because she still hasn't." The crowd turned to Morgan. She looked down, blinking away tears. After the ceremony, people came in waves. Old friends. Strangers. Even kids who had never met a veteran before. And for the first time in a long time, Eli felt something stir deep inside, like the part of him he'd buried had finally come home. Later that evening, back at the cabin, he placed the medals in a small wooden box beside Morgan's reinstated medical license. "Feels like a new chapter," she said quietly. Eli nodded, slipping his arm around her. "And this time, we write it together." The days that followed the ceremony were quiet, but not in the way that used to haunt them. This time, the stillness felt earned, like the calm after a long, painful storm. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. It just became possible again. Morgan decided not to return to Denver, at least not yet. The VA there had offered her a job, but she turned it down with a smile. "I think there's more work to do right here," she told Eli one morning over breakfast. Jackson Hole had veterans of its own, men and women who had quietly slipped through the cracks of the system. Morgan began volunteering at the local clinic, offering therapy and checkups for free. Word spread quickly. The woman with the steady voice and military boots understood things most doctors never could. Eli, meanwhile, reopened his garage. The shop had gathered dust for years, but now he worked with a steadier hand, fixing more than engines. He'd let young vets from town hang around, offering them tools and small jobs. He didn't say much, but his presence said everything. One evening, they sat on the cabin porch, the air crisp with the first signs of summer. Morgan leaned her head on Eli's shoulder. "You ever think about how weird it is?" she asked. "Of all the places to break down, I picked the exact stretch of road outside your cabin." Eli gave a small smile. "I don't think it was luck." She looked up. "What, then?" "Maybe it was the universe giving us a second shot. We both thought we lost something we couldn't get back. Turns out, we just needed to find each other." Morgan fell quiet, watching the sun dip behind the mountains. There was a peace in her chest now, a quiet strength that had once felt impossible. She had come into town a ghost, weighed down by guilt, shame, and silence. Now she was building a life. One with roots. One that mattered. And Eli, who had once built walls high enough to block out the world, was finally letting the light in. Together, they weren't trying to erase the past. They were just living forward, one honest day at a time. Months passed, and the rhythm of life settled into something steady, something real. Mornings were quiet, filled with strong coffee and the hum of Eli's tools in the garage. Evenings often ended on the porch, watching the sky change colors over the mountains, Morgan's laughter filling the space that once held only silence. There were still hard days, moments when Eli would wake from dreams that took him back to sand and smoke, or when Morgan's hands would tremble at the sound of sudden thunder. But now, they had each other. And that made all the difference. On Veterans Day, nearly a year after their reunion, Morgan was invited to speak at the same ceremony where Eli had once stood. She wore her old uniform blouse beneath a soft gray coat, and this time, when she walked to the podium, her steps didn't waver. "I used to believe that strength meant never breaking," she said, her voice steady. "But I've learned that real strength is found in the breaking, and in choosing to get back up, even when everything in you says not to." She looked toward Eli in the crowd. He nodded once. "Just enough. We can't always fix the world," she continued. "But we can show up for each other. And sometimes, that's enough. Sometimes, that's everything." The applause was warm and long. Later that night, back at the cabin, Morgan slipped a small photo into the frame next to their medals on the mantel. It was a picture taken during the ceremony, Eli, standing tall with his medals, and Morgan beside him, smiling like someone who had come back from somewhere far away. "I never thought I'd have this again," she said softly. Eli looked at her, his voice low. "What's that?" "Hope." They sat together in the quiet. No big speeches. No dramatic music. Just the steady sound of the wind through the trees and the comfort of knowing they didn't have to face the world alone. Because sometimes, the greatest rescue doesn't happen on a battlefield, it happens when two people, broken in their own ways, meet at the right moment and decide to keep going together. If this story moved you, take a moment to share it with someone who might need a reminder that healing is possible. Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts or personal experiences. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more true life stories, and hit the bell so you never miss an upload. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter.